Hello and welcome to my channel. Today I will be looking at following topic: top 14 countries with higher debt to GDP. 14. Zambia. Debt to GDP ratio 123%. Zambia has had large debt to GDP ratios, largely owing to reckless lending by Western banks. Restructuring such mounting debts in the country means it is heading towards critical negotiations. As such, IMF has agreed to a bailout plan worth $1.3 billion, with strict measures imposed on the Zambian people. 13. Suriname. Debt to GDP ratio 124%. Suriname's debt levels approximate $4 billion, with a debt to GDP ratio of 124%. Many years of economic mismanagement have led the country to face external and fiscal imbalances. As a result, inflation has escalated, and the exchange rate has suffered considerable depreciation. 12. Bhutan. Debt to GDP ratio 125%. Bhutan heavily relies on its hydropower exports, which is why its debt to GDP ratio is so high. 11. United States. Debt to GDP ratio 129%. The United States has also been facing a debt that is larger than its GDP for several years. The country reached its debt ceiling in January at $31 trillion plus, which brings the debt to GDP ratio to about 129%. However, the US often increases its debt limit to continue borrowing. Revenue drops, government war funding, and a wide range of tax cuts have been responsible for the large debt to GDP ratio for the country. 10. Cape Verde. Debt to GDP ratio 130%. Cape Verde's national debt stands at $3.05 billion as of 2023. The debt to GDP ratio of 130% is largely due to the pandemic, prolonged drought, and the Russia-Ukraine conflict, considering it imports 11% oil and 8% cereals from Russia. Services and renewable energy are expected to drive growth in the coming years. 9. Italy. Debt to GDP ratio 145%. Italy has a huge public debt of about 145% and mostly runs a current account surplus. About 45% of the stock is foreign-owned, while rich Italian savers hold it too. As of 2023, Italy's national government debt stood at nearly $3 trillion. However, the country's economy is expected to show some resilience, considering fiscal support and natural gas supply diversion from Russia. 8. Libya. Debt to GDP ratio 155%. Libya's public debt has been reaching high levels, with a debt to GDP ratio of 155%. However, the outlook for the economy remains positive as it's projected to grow by 4.4% in 2023. This is largely due to higher revenues coming in from oil output. 7. Singapore. Debt to GDP ratio 160%. Singapore's debt levels stand at $560 billion, and its debt to GDP ratio is approximately 160%. This debt is largely fiscally sustainable, considering it comprises Singaporean government securities and savings bonds not used for spending. Borrowing proceeds are invested, which means the country has strong assets and zero net debt. 6. Eritrea. Debt to GDP ratio 164%. Lack of access to international markets, long years of political instability, and economic sanctions have all been reasons for a high debt to GDP ratio for Eritrea. Consistent debt-financed budget deficits will also continue to be the reason for the high ratio in the long term. However, the rise in global demand for metals means revenues are gradually picking pace. As of 2021, Eritrea's external debt stood at $744,742,728. 5. Greece. Debt-to-GDP ratio, 171%. Greece has one of the highest government debts as a percentage of gross domestic product. The country's debt-to-GDP ratio began skyrocketing in the financial crisis of 2008, deteriorating further due to structural economic weaknesses and lack of flexibility in their monetary policy. However, recent years have seen primary balances improve, and debt-to-GDP is projected to decrease to 140% in 2024. 4. Lebanon. Debt-to-GDP ratio, 172%. Public finances in Lebanon have been crippling due to interest payments, consuming half of the country's revenues. High interest rates, public sector wage increases in 2017, and costs in post-war reconstruction have all added to the country's financial problems. 3. Sudan. Debt-to-GDP ratio, 182%. Poor economic policies, years of conflicts, and sanctions are some of the main reasons for plunging Sudan into a major debt crisis. However, 2021 saw the IMF and World Bank approving Sudan's eligibility for debt relief, considering its commendable accomplishments in bringing economic reform. Such a debt relief will help improve living standards for Sudanese, reduce poverty, and increase economic prospects. 2. Venezuela. Debt-to-GDP ratio, 241%. Venezuela is one of the topmost countries with an external public debt crisis, estimated at more than $150 billion. The country has been highly reliant on oil, whose output dropped by 2.5% in 2022. Coupled with inadequate investment in other sectors, GDP levels have shrunk by 3/4, worsening this ratio. 1. Japan. Debt-to-GDP ratio, 264%. Escalating social welfare costs amidst a rapidly aging population, big spending packages, and a shrinking labor force have driven Japan into a debt of approximately $9.8 trillion. This amount of debt is mostly in its own currency. The central bank holds part of it, while domestic savers hold the rest. Only 7% of it is foreign-owned. Therefore, the country is hardly dependent on the kindness of foreigners. Thanks for watching. For more videos of this kind, please like and subscribe.